Good afternoon, everyone. It is Thursday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, digital sports producer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and we are here with Paul Zeise for the first video edition of Zeise is Right. Me and Paul did a lot of Steelers post-game during Steelers season, but now we've been trying to think of ways to get Paul involved on YouTube now that we don't have those weekly chats about the Steelers. So we're going to be doing weekly, just me setting up Paul to tell you what his thoughts are on some Pittsburgh thoughts of the day. So, Paul, how are you? And good to have you back.
Well, it's good to be back, and I'm doing really well for sure. How can you not when the weather's this nice?
Absolutely. I'm looking outside. It's almost 70 degrees in February. Pretty mild winter, so I'll take it. Paul, the first topic I wanted to set you up on is your colleague at 93.7 The Fan, Andrew Filipponi, said there were rumblings at the Super Bowl this past week that the Steelers are interested in Baltimore Ravens cornerback Marcus Peters as, a potential, kind of taking in that Joe Hayden role. He's 30 years old. He's a veteran. I think he's fairly well regarded. What do you think of him as a potential fit with the Steelers defense?
Well, it certainly would fill a big need that they have. I mean, if you think about the needs that they have, they're going into this offseason. Corner, to me, that top corner is probably as big of a need as they have anywhere else. I know we've talked about offensive line. We've talked about, linebacker a little bit. We've talked about even receiver, but they don't have a top corner. And the thing about it is when you get a guy who can come in and be that guy, you saw even with Joe Hayden how it changes your defense a whole lot, because now you can use your second guy is probably, now it's a better fit for your second guy, and it pushes and gives you some options for your slot guy. And I think that's the biggest thing with the Steelers. They've got a lot of number two and slot kind of corners, but they really don't have that. They don't have that guy that can be, the guy who's going to, D up the other team's best receiver. You can feel pretty good that a lot of the game, you don't have to give them a ton of help. That just changes everything that you can do with the rest of your defense. So the question would become, as always, how much? What's the contract going to look like? How much money it's going to, eat up of your salary cap, and whether or not that is feasible. And of course, whenever we talk about off-season trades and things of the such, a lot of people like to play fantasy football and don't necessarily take those things into account. But at the end of the day, that's the reality is it going to fit the Steelers' cap? And to me, I'll say this too. Seeing how bad the Steelers have been at drafting corners, if you're going to fill that need, this might be the way to go, right? This might be the way to go. Go get a veteran, because the last time you did it, really, you went and got Joe Hayden, and it turned out to be pretty good. They've gone out and gotten some lesser corners over the course of time, right? Weatherspoon was one, but at the end of the day, if you're looking to go get a splash, make a splash move in free agency, I'd much rather it be at corner than any other position, because corner is a position I think it's difficult necessarily. Sometimes it's difficult if you don't get one of those top 2 or 3 can't miss guys. A lot of times you're guessing. And so you want to make sure that you bring in a corner, because to be honest, when you've got a defense that's got a superstar a superstar linebacker, a pretty good outside linebacker on the other side, and a superstar at defensive line, if you add a corner in there that can really play, I think the other guys are almost nameless and faceless. You're going to have a really good defense. So to me, the Steelers probably are one piece away from, in terms of needing a star caliber or a player that can really be a difference maker. They're going to need help at inside linebacker as well. But I don't know that it's necessarily nearly as important to go get a top of the line type of guy as it is a corner.
Yeah, I think you led into my next question well, Paul, which is, because I agree with you. I think the if you're going to go to free agency, where have the Steelers had the least track record of developing players and getting them to that next level of being competent? And the Steelers have definitely struggled there. So let's just say hypothetically the Steelers signed Marcus Peters or another veteran corner to kind of play opposite Cameron Sutton, who I think people pretty widely expect to be back as well for this team. What is your number one need once that's been addressed? And where would you spend, that first draft pick, depending upon what's available? But what would you be eyeing as that top potential need?
So just so I have it right, you're saying we fill the corner spot?
Right. Yes.
Okay. So they say they go get a free agent corner. Okay. I think you would not at that point. You would not be out of line if you took a receiver or you took even an inside linebacker with that first pick, or even a defensive lineman. I know there's a lot of people that believe that it's got to be offensive line. Adam, the one thing that we saw this year, it feels like the line got a little better every week. You got a lot of young guys on that offensive line. They're all back. All 5 of them are back. So I don't know that I agree with people who think that the offensive line is like the most pressing need. I mean, I know people, got it in their head that Dan Moore is the worst player that's ever played, and we need a left tackle. I don't know. I saw a guy a little better every week. I'm not saying he's great. I'm not saying he's one of the top tackles in the league. I'm saying I don't know that if you draft a tackle at, what are they drafting, 17, 18, whatever it is, I don't know that if you draft a tackle at 17 or 18, you're going to get a better player next year than Dan Moore. So to me, you have to weigh that as far as, okay, maybe if we give Dan Moore one more year of development, he's going to get to the point where he, justifies our faith in him. And if he doesn't, obviously there's other options we can go to next year. But for this year, our best option probably is going to be Dan Moore at left tackle. So to me, I don't know that you absolutely have to use that spot to go get an offensive lineman like so many people think. To me, if you've got, the opportunity to draft an inside linebacker that can be an impact player, that's at 17, you're probably going to have a chance to draft maybe even the best or one of the best inside linebackers, right? If you have a chance to go get that guy, that probably changes your team more than offensive lineman. And to me, if you went inside linebacker and then you came back with that, pick like about 32 or whatever it is with a receiver, and then with pick like 57 or 58 or whatever it is, then you went defensive line or offensive line. That to me would probably be an ideal way to start to do the draft.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly see the wisdom. I'll slightly disagree with you and say that I think, if you can get a good tackle that you think can be a fixture for the next 10 years, then I say go get that. I think you make a good point about, can this guy be better than Dan Moore immediately? I don't know. I mean, we're going to have to see who's available, but I think, I also don't see Dan Moore out at that spot for the next decade either. And I think if you're going to upgrade,
yeah, that's a different discussion, Adam, which we could see, a scenario where you move him inside, right? Take, one of the veterans, don't re-sign one of the veteran guards or whatever, move him inside and you bring a tackle in. I mean, here's my thing. If you're the Steelers, I think you're trying to set yourself up for the next 5 years, right? And so if you really believe that Dan Moore's best spot going forward is going to be inside, then I would agree with you. Take a tackle and let's get the process started now and move on from one of your guards, whichever Dotson or whatever. My point is, there's things you can do, but if you believe that Dan Moore is your tackle for this season, then I'm not taking a tackle with my first pick, because I want my first pick to be somebody who's going to be an impact player for this year.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, Paul. They have to add some guys, and it's just a matter of what's available. I think we always talk about what's the best player available. I think this is definitely a best player available type of season for the Steelers. I wanted to ask you briefly about Devin Bush. I think there's some pretty wide speculation that he's not going to be back next season. We've talked about him a lot on our post-game shows. I think he was better in 2022 than he was in 2021 when he was pretty much an outright disaster. Visually, all the metrics absolutely hated him, but he showed improvement. Do you wish you were going to get another look at him? Do you think that's something the Steelers might want to reconsider, or do you think it's time to move on from that?
Well, the problem they're going to have is that they're not going to offer him a lot of money. Yeah, I mean, if they could get him back on the cheap, yeah, they're going to bring him back. I'm sure they're going to bring him back. But, he showed enough that some team is going to come and overpay for him, probably, right? I don't think the Steelers want to be in the business of overpaying for somebody on the idea that he might, in year 5, figure it out. I just don't think that's a good plan. I don't think that's how the Steelers operate. And I feel like he's not going to take a terrible deal or, significantly less money. He's just not going to do that. He knows that he's got there's value to him, and he's going to make sure that he gets paid.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. Paul, I want to switch gears here briefly to baseball/hockey. We're recording on Wednesday afternoon, and the big story of the day is that Sportico is reporting that AT&T SportsNet gave only a portion of its payment to the Pirates, its normal payment to the Pirates, for their annual local television contract, that they fell short. This amid Bally Sports, which owns almost 20 regional sports networks around the country, missing their interest payment, possibly heading toward bankruptcy. It's a big story in sports that I feel like not a lot of people are talking about, because there could be huge revenue shortfalls. It looked for a moment like the Pirates and the Penguins might avoid that situation, but now there's reporting to suggest they might not. A source reached out to me after I published the story, which I'll include the link to down in the description. A source that's familiar with the matter said that that's not true, that the payment isn't due until the beginning of the season. But that source also acknowledged that there's obviously challenges in the regional sportsnet model right now. So, Paul, let me ask you this: where do you see this going? Not just locally, because I think it's more than a local issue. There's 3 AT&T SportsNets; they're all reportedly in trouble. Bally Sports is in a lot more trouble. Where do you see this going for the hockey, basketball, and baseball worlds? Do you think we're starting to see a transition more to a model kind of like what the NFL has, where all the rights are national? Everyone all around the country can watch games. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be on CBS every night, probably not, but some kind of national distribution model where all of the teams, play on a similar platform every night.
Well, I think it's going to be tough to pull off for a lot of reasons, obviously. And I think that the regional sports network model, surprised it's lasted as long as it has in markets like Pittsburgh, to be honest. Quite frankly, it's one thing if you're in Los Angeles or New York or Chicago or one of those markets, but the smaller markets, it's not just about, people don't realize it's not just about the number of eyeballs that might be on a TV scene and this and that and everything. It's corporate dollars that have to support this. It's commercials. It's all of that other stuff. And there's only so much of that to go around in a town like Pittsburgh. And the priority, when the Penguins were really good, I guess there was a priority to try and get them on TV every night with I actually see it in a way that might go, for instance, the NFL going to, what is it, Paramount or NBC Peacock Plus or whatever the hell that's it, you know what I mean? Or Amazon or whatever. I actually think that might be the direction all of this starts to head, where the streaming services that are used, the streaming services are the ones now that are picking up regional broadcasts and picking up regional, teams and things for these smaller markets and maybe even for the entire league. But the thing is, if the caveat being that the larger markets can still control their own regional telecasts if they so desire. I think that is going to be like what we see over the next 8 to 10 years, is that a lot of these regional broadcasts are going to be on streaming services or on things like what is it, Peacock TV or whatever it is, or NBC Plus or whatever. That to me seems to be where it's going, because again, because at that point then you can actually pull a lot of national resources and everything else and make it a sustainable model. Right now, I'm like I said, I'm not surprised by this. I don't know, obviously you did the story and you did a little bit more, you did the research on it and all the other stuff, but I'm not surprised to hear you tell the story and in a little bit of it that I read. It doesn't surprise me, because I've always thought these regional networks, which is why, honestly, I'll give you an example. I mean, it's why, this AT&T SportsNet has been KBL, then Prime Sports, then it was Fox TV, then it was, you know what I mean? It's almost like it's one of those situations where, I don't know if you have it, but there's like a restaurant up in the North Hills that every single owner believes they can make it work, which is why, since I've lived where I live over the last 25 years, there's been about 13 owners, it changes names about every 2 years. I've always viewed these regional networks as sort of that similar thing where the next guy thinks they can make it work, and it's just not necessarily possible for the simple fact that there's not enough other there's just not enough other money to make it sustainable, and also I don't know that there's the audience to make it sustainable. So I'm just going to be interested to see how it plays out. But Adam, if I had to make a prediction, which is what you made me do, I would say that we will see an increase in streaming services and that stuff become more the model for these regional networks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much in agreement with you, Paul. I think what the thing that is probably at biggest risk right now is that regional broadcast. Right now, you have two networks, two regional sports networks broadcasting every game. So you basically have two broadcasts of the same game every night. If it's the Pirates playing the Cardinals, you have two different broadcasts for that. I think that's going away. I think you're going to see something, something kind of like what ESPN Plus has right now with the NHL. Where you can get every game on one streaming service, but you're only going to have one broadcast a night. And maybe it'll be more like what Peacock did this past season, where they had one broadcaster from one team, one broadcaster from the other, kind of make things work. So I think that just seems like the obvious cost-cutting measure, right? Is you don't have two sets of cameras, you don't have two sets of commentators, you have one set for both of those things, and I think you're going to lose a little bit of that regional flavor.
Right. I mean, I think that's the way of the world. I think that's the way it's going. I mean, it's look at how fast things have changed for the NFL and the way they're doing business in terms of their broadcasts. And that's the NFL. Think about it. They're the biggest show on earth in terms of sports. And they've been trying to figure out a model that works in terms of revenues and in terms of being able to get viewers to watch and all that other stuff. I mean, it's not an easy answer because it's one of those things where as the world changes, and of course you and I in the newspaper business understand this probably better than just about everybody else, as the world changes and people consume news or people consume, in this case sports differently, entities like sports leagues have to react and try and figure out how to stay ahead of the curve. And to me it's almost an antiquated model to have regional sports networks broadcasting the games with regional broadcasters every single night, just from the standpoint of, as you said, costs, but also it doesn't feel like that is where the future is headed here.
Paul, one other Pirates topic I wanted to touch on. It was also the big story. We finally heard from Brian Reynolds today for the start of Pirates spring training pitchers and catchers reporting to Bradenton, Florida. Brian Reynolds was part of that group, even though he's not a pitcher or a catcher, addressed the reports that he requested a trade. Our Jason Mackey has that story. I'll again include the link to that down in the description, so please check that out. But basically, Paul, the way it sounded is he's happy with his working conditions with the Pirates. He likes his coaches, he likes his teammates, he likes playing for the team, but the business end of this is a different story, and it doesn't look like, barring some kind of pivot by the Pirates, they're going to be able to come together on a contract to keep him here. What's your read on what we heard from Brian Reynolds today and what that means for the Pirates as they look ahead to 2023?
Well, I mean, obviously Brian Reynolds was always going to say the right thing. He's not a guy that's going to, come out and say, anything controversial. He's not a guy that's a me first, me guy. But as he said, hey, it's a business, man. I'm not out here playing just to play. I'm not trying to just, So I think one of the things is the Pirates have to make a decision here. Now, I know that he's got this year, right? And then he's got 2 more. So there are some people that say, well, I mean, you've got 3 years. Why not just use them for 3 years? And then, you at the end of the 3 years, you let him walk, but at least you got 3 years out of him at a very cheap price. And baseball teams don't do that business that way. B, if you're trying to build something, right, and then you get to a point 3 years from now where you have a team that's on the brink of like, okay, now we're going to win. Next year we're really ready to win, and you get rid of maybe your best player at that point, it doesn't make a lot of sense. They have to decide, are we going to pay him what he's worth? Are we going to tear up these last 3 years of his deal? I mean, to me, what's Brian Reynolds, 27, 28 years old? How old is he? What is he, about 28?
He's 27.
27, okay. So to me, if I'm the Pirates, you look at it and you say, Brian, listen, here's what we'll do. We'll tear up these last 3 years. We'll give you 3 more. That's 6 years. A 6-year deal worth, what's he want? $150, $150 million, something like that. You're not hamstringing yourself, forever. It's not one of these 10, 12-year deal where you got a guy who's 38 years old and he's in the 9th year and you still got another year of that. You're not doing that. He'll be still a pretty relatively young guy at 33, probably could sign another deal somewhere else at 33. But either you get to that or trade him. And now you can't trade him now, but you should trade him by the deadline, at the trade deadline, or in the off season. So he still has 2 years left, which helps you maximize his value. Because at the end of the day, after, if he starts playing again next year and all of a sudden now he's only got a year left when you try and trade him, that's a big consideration. But what you were able to sell with him is, hey, we've got a really good player here, a really good player who also has, at the trade deadline, 2.5 seasons left at a very, very cheap price, relative to the market. And so that's how you can maximize what you get. To me, the strategy of trying to completely just sort of oversell or overplay your hand to see that you can get far more than you probably are going to get. It was almost like a stall tactic this winter. They weren't really trying to trade him, which is okay. But they need to make a decision here in the next 6 months. What they do with him? Because I don't think that he's the kind of guy that becomes a malcontent. I think he's the kind of guy that show up and play hard and, try and win and do what he has to do every single day. But you don't want to push it. You don't want to push your luck too much with that. And I think at the end of the day, to look at a trade line or even the off season, because you still have 2 years left. But you have to understand that this cannot go on for another season beyond this one. You either have to commit to signing him now, but if you don't commit to signing him now, Adam, then it doesn't make sense. Because now you're starting to talk about him getting a little bit, another year older, another year, of his career gone, another year of his prime gone. That's why you're either going to sign him now or you're going to trade him within the next year. It's got to be one or the other.
Yeah, I agree, Paul. I would have advocated and I think they should have spent on him, but that ship has clearly sailed. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think Jason Mackey, our Pirates reporter, thinks it's going to happen. So it's just a question of, can you get an offer you're satisfied with, toward the deadline. Paul, with all of this swarming around, what is your general level of optimism about the Pirates? They spent a lot of money in the offseason, but a lot of it was on pretty short-term guys. I think, in terms of the development of their internal options, there's been some good things, but there's also been some misses. What are your thoughts on the state of play with the Pirates as we begin spring training? Are you optimistic, or do you have reasons for concern?
I'll say this. I would say this, Adam. For the first time in about 3 years, I could see that there's going to be probably some tangible upward movement in terms of number of wins. What that's going to be, I don't know. Right? I mean, what did they win last year? 69, I think, or no?
62. Yeah, they lost 100. So
it was 160. So it was 62 and 100. I mean, I could actually see them making a jump to, like, say, 70 and 92, something like that. And I think that at that point, if they make that kind of a jump and they get to 70, 71 wins, it could be the start of something really good if the right players are the ones that are driving that, right? And that's the big thing. For instance, is Rosie Contreras stay healthy the whole season and show that, hey, this guy has a real chance to be an ace of the future, right? If they win 70 games because Rich Hill is able to trick it up and win you 8 or 9 or 10 games, you know what I mean? And Carlos Santana finds a fountain of youth and gets really hot for 2 months or whatever, I don't know if that's necessarily what I would consider to be progress. Obviously Hill is what he is. I think he'll eat innings for them. But again, I think with both Hill and Santana, as you know, if they're not in contention at the trading deadline and those guys are having good seasons, they're only going to be here till the trading deadline, and they'll trade them and try and get some prospects. And at that point, you're asking yourself, where is the progress? So there's a lot at stake, I think, right now. In terms of the credibility of the front office, I think number one, the credibility of the Pirates, number two. But I think the other part of it is we have to start to see things move forward with some of these younger guys and some of these prospects. And not just at the major league level. I mean, what's the catcher that has been, basically a step away for at least 5 years now, it seems. Is that Austin Davis? Is that his name?
Henry Davis and then Andy Rodriguez are the two big names.
Yes, Henry Davis, that's his name. And Nick Gonzalez. Remember when they drafted him and he was going to revolutionize the world? I mean, he's a guy now that I'm reading people say, I'm not sure if he's ever going to translate into a great Major League Baseball player or even a good player. My point is, we've got to see progress in that department. The young guys, some of the young guys that have been sort of in a holding pattern need to be ready to play in the majors. We need to see some of the young guys that are on the roster. I mean, obviously, O'Neal Cruz having a really big year would be a good thing for the Pirates, right? But if you look around the diamond, if the good year, meaning the 70, 71 year win year, is driven by, McCutchen finding the fountain of youth and hitting, 15, 16 home runs and driving in some guys and Santana, finding his little fountain of youth and having 2 months where he's like scorching hot, and Hill, slopping together a bunch of wins just by, blood and guts. And even, to a lesser degree, Mitch Keller. I mean, Mitch Keller, to me, is still a young enough guy that he can be a part of the next few years. But at some point, you know what? At some point, he starts to become an older guy that you're starting to think about maybe moving on from. And maybe, so he's got to have a big year. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to, the progress of the young guys. And if the young guys show progress, and if it looks like, okay, we've got, like I said, great example, the best example I can come up with, Rosie Contreras. This is a guy in September we're saying, boy, the next 4 or 5 years, he's going to take the Pirates on a ride. If we're saying that, then it'll be a successful season in my mind.
Yeah, I think you and I are pretty much on the same page, Paul. I've been saying I'm getting a lot of 2003 vibes from this offseason, signing a bunch of veterans. And you'll remember the Pirates were not terrible that year, but they were carried by guys like Matt Stairs and Kenny Lofton and I think what was his name, the pitcher, Jeff Suppan. They were all good players. They all helped that team win, like, I think 75 or so games. They were, fun to watch, scored a lot of runs, but they weren't very good. And those guys were all gone, within a year. And you were left with a Dave Littlefield core of players who never panned out and never developed. So, I have concerns that we are heading in that direction. I think this year is pivotal to avoid that by, showing that these young players can be different than like Ian Snell and Paul Maholm and Zach Duke and those guys that never quite worked out here for the Pirates. Paul, I want to wrap up by asking you about some things you've written this week about the Super Bowl. You've spent a lot of time on Kansas City, writing about Patrick Mahomes, writing about Andy Reid, the things they did to help win that Super Bowl championship. What lessons do you think, having really studied them up close, what lessons do you think the Steelers can learn from that franchise as they look to, probably follow that same model of having a young quarterback and getting the most out of the rest of the roster, building a strong roster around that quarterback so that they can win at a high level.
Well, I think one of the things that we saw in the Super Bowl is that Reed and Bieniemy schemed circles around the Eagles. They really did. One of the things that a lot of us said, and most people said, and rightfully so, going into the Super Bowl was what? That the front seven of the Eagles was going to absolutely devour the Chiefs. And instead of that happening, you saw a lot of stuff where they were getting the ball out quick. You saw a lot of stuff where they were chipping guys and then, throwing over their heads. You saw a lot of stuff where they were using misdirection in the run game, right? And even though, Mahomes is a magician, I mean, a lot of the throws he was making, he was making them to wide open guys, you know what I mean, in different parts of the field. The great example was the 2 touchdowns. I don't know if you read or, listened to what Eric Bieniemy was saying, or I'm sorry, what Chad Henne was saying about the 2 touchdowns. The one that, they went up 28-27 with, and then the other one they went up 35-27, those 2 touchdowns. One was to Sky Moore, and the other was on the other side to whoever it was. The bottom line, that was 100% film study and scheme. Eric Bieniemy was watching, watched how a bunch of different films on how the Eagles defense reacted to jet sweeps, and basically said, you know what, if we do jet sweep kind of action, the guy on the backside is going to be wide open every single time because they're always so concerned about using their cover guy to try and stop the jet sweep. And sure enough, he said, we not only got it once, we got it twice. And there's a lot of other plays that I could point to where they completely neutralized the pass rush of the Eagles, right? So I think the thing I learned, we learn quite often, but sometimes you see it. I actually think the Eagles are not just better than the Chiefs, but much better. I mean, I think that the Chiefs were much better coached, much better prepared, executed their game plan a lot better, and obviously, the X factor is they have the best quarterback on the planet, and that helps a lot. But to me, having a dynamic offense, it doesn't have to be a dynamic offense where you're doing anything all that complicated. It's about sequencing your play calls, scheming against what the defense is doing, and taking what the defense is giving you, which is really what Patrick Mahomes did in our game. I can think of very few times, if any, that he really tried to throw the ball downfield. They didn't want him to because they didn't want him getting sacked. They didn't want him getting hit. And that's what the Eagles did. That's what they did to a lot of opponents. They made you, they got a lead on you, made you a little desperate, wanted you to start throwing the net, and then all of a sudden they racked up sacks. Chiefs never let that happen. So, it's a matter of offensive scheming against defenses that you can have a dynamic offense without having to, throw the ball over the field. I mean, Mahomes threw for 170 yards or something like that. You can have a dynamic offense without having to throw the ball all over the field and make big chunk plays and things of the such if you're scheming guys open. So to me, listen, I see that the Ravens hired the guy from Georgia, the offensive coordinator from Georgia, which is good because I was worried that they were going to hire Eric Bieniemy, which I think Eric Bieniemy bringing what he was going to bring from Kansas City with Lamar Jackson, that could be a really scary offense to deal with. And I think that Bieniemy, my guess is he's going to get not the Redskins, what are they called? The Commanders job. He's going to get the Commanders job, and he's going to do really, really well there because of the way, the things that he's going to bring from Andy Reid. I think the other thing is you learned a little bit about the fact that if your defense is opportunistic, as Mike Tomlin always talks about, on the meaty downs, you can give up a ton of yards. You can give up a lot of plays, and you can still win a game. I mean, obviously, it took 38 points to beat the Eagles, but at the end of the day, that game changed in the second half when the Chiefs were able to get some stops on third down and limit the Eagles to only 8 points in the second half. Most of that was just making play. I mean, they have 11 points in the second half. Most of that was just basically making plays on third down. And that's really what it comes down to. Get a team in third and 4 or 3rd and 5 and make a play. So the Eagles had some drives that were 8 or 9 plays long, and then
Yeah, it was an interesting game, and I think there is a lot that you hope the Steelers can take from it. I don't know how confident I am that Matt Canada can scheme those touchdowns and recognize those patterns and make it happen. If he could, I think we would have seen more explosiveness from the Steelers offense. But maybe the combination of him with Kenny Pickett with a little more confidence, with a little more recognition skill, with a little more just being in the NFL and seeing how things work. Maybe they can make those strides this year, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big thing. When you go into the season now, the one thing I'll say, and again, this sounds like me sort of making an excuse for Matt Canada, but the one thing I'll say is now you're going into the off season and you know who your quarterback is, so you have a whole off season to design everything you're going to do for one guy's specific talents. You have the ability to sit down with that guy and say, what do you like? What don't you like? What do you think works for you? What doesn't work for you? All that stuff. You didn't have that last year. So that's just another thing, another part of it.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Paul, thanks for joining me for this maiden voyage of Zeise is Right. We're going to have you back next week, every week, possibly, hopefully right up until football season, where we'll transition back into the post-game shows, because you folks seemed to love that on YouTube. We got a lot of great response from that this season. So we're just trying to keep that momentum going into the football off season. Paul, anything else?
No, that's about it. I mean, like I said, the one thing I wrote this week was about Patrick Mahomes. He's got 2 Super Bowls in 5 years. There are a lot of people that think it's all, almost a lock. He's going to get to 7. I would really pump the brakes on that. 7 is a big, big number. I'm talking, obviously, Tom Brady has 7 of them. Think about it like this. He's 27 years old now. The next 10 years will be 37. In order to get to 7 in the next 10 years before he's 37, he needs to win basically every other year. I just don't think that. I don't see that happening.
Yeah, I think it's going to be difficult, especially because he's going to cost more and more money, and I think we've seen a lot of careers kind of. I think the thing that made Tom Brady exceptional is that that didn't happen with him in New England. He was able to make use of lesser players than other guys had, namely like Ben Roethlisberger in Pittsburgh. But because he was able to do that, that's what set him apart from some of these other guys. I think Patrick Mahomes, he may run into that same wall a little bit further down the road than maybe Eli Manning did, or that Ben Roethlisberger did, or that Aaron Rodgers did. But I think, just the modern capology of of the NFL today just doesn't lend itself to dominating the way Tom Brady did. And that's kind of what made him so amazing.
Absolutely. No question about it. Well, Adam, thank you so much, and we'll do it again next week.
Absolutely. And if you're just joining us for the first time, please remember, pop a like on this video, help us out with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe to the channel. We'll have a lot more football talk this week with Christopher Carter on the North Shore Drive. Also, please check out the subscription deal down in the description, $6 for 6 months of access to post-gazette.com. Going to get you all the way through the football offseason, so make sure you're signed up for that. Paul, thank you, and we will look forward to talking to you again next week.
All right, sounds good, man.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.